Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're plunging into a topic that's, well, often talked about, definitely experienced by many, but maybe less understood than we think. The biology and experience of orgasm.
Absolutely. It's fascinating stuff.
We've gathered some really interesting sources, from clinical definitions, quite technical stuff, right through to evolutionary theories.
Yeah, trying to unpack this really complex, very human phenomenon for you.
Our mission today really is to cut through some of the noise, maybe some myths too.
For sure.
And just distill the essential nuggets of knowledge, help you become genuinely well-informed about something that touches on pleasure, health.
Even our origins, potentially.
Exactly. So get ready for, hopefully, some surprising facts and maybe a few aha moments.
We will indeed. We'll explore, what actually defines an orgasm, the different ways people achieve it,
Right.
its impact physiologically, neurologically, and yeah, those big debates about its function, its expression.
It does make you wonder, doesn't it? How much do we truly grasp about something so, well, fundamental? Okay, so let's unpack this first bit. We all have a general idea, right? But what's the, official word? The clinical take.
Okay, so clinically, an orgasm is defined by that sudden discharge of accumulated sexual excitement.
Right, the buildup and release.
Exactly. And that leads to rhythmic, involuntary muscular contractions, mostly in the pelvic region.
Involuntary being key there.
Very key. It's characterized mainly by intense sexual pleasure, and it's controlled by the autonomic nervous system.
So the part of the brain running things automatically, like breathing?
Precisely. You don't consciously control it. And yeah, it often comes with that euphoric feeling, body movements, sometimes vocalizations.
And the period after that, I've heard of the refractory period. What's going on there?
That's right. The refractory period, usually it's quite a relaxing experience, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And that's attributed to the release of neurohormones, things like oxytocin, prolactin, and also endorphins.
Nature's pain relief and mood boosters.
Kinda, yeah.
But I've seen that definitions can vary quite a bit. Is there really a consensus, or is it messy?
Oh, it's definitely messy. It's quite striking, actually. Despite how common it is, there isn't one single universal consensus.
Really?
Yeah, the journal Clinical Psychology Review alone, it lists at least 26 definitions.
26, wow, for orgasm. That's a lot.
It is. Because you've got the purely physiological definitions, but then also psychological ones, endocrinological, neurological.
It's different fields see it slightly differently.
Exactly. And this ambiguity, it makes it challenging to classify certain intense sexual sensations.
Like what?
Well, maybe sensations from G-spot stimulation or those kind of extended orgasms some people describe. They might be incredibly pleasurable, but they don't always involve those classic involuntary contractions. So where do they fit?
26 definitions. That really underlines how complex and maybe individual this experience is, doesn't it? Even for scientists.
It certainly does.
So, okay, if the definition itself is that broad, how do people generally achieve orgasm? Is it always about, physical touch?
Well, physical touch is the most common route, for sure. Usually physical stimulation of the penis in males, typically with ejaculation,
Right.
and the clitoris in females. But orgasms can be achieved in a really wide variety of ways.
Such as?
Things like vaginal, anal, or oral sex, obviously, but also non-penetrative sex, masturbation, using sex toys like vibrators.
Okay, standard ways. What about less common routes? I feel like I've heard some wild stories.
Well, some aren't that wild. Stimulation of nipples or other erogenous zones can lead to orgasm. It's rarer, but it happens.
Okay.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Orgasms can actually be achieved through psychological arousal alone.
Without any physical touch.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like during dreaming, what people call nocturnal emissions or wet dreams.
Oh.
Or even through what's known in consensual context as forced orgasm. And what's particularly insightful, I think, is that orgasm, just by psychological stimulation, was first reported among people with spinal cord injuries.
Wow. So even without the direct nerve connection.
Exactly. It shows that erotic desires, feelings, they can persist even when physical function is severely impacted. The brain is powerful.
Psychological arousal alone. And the spinal cord injury insight. That's genuinely fascinating. It really highlights the brain's role, doesn't it? Even overriding the physical sometimes.
It really does.
So does this intense psychological component mean the experience itself, psychologically speaking, is different for men and women?
That's a good question. Historically, the scientific literature tended to focus more on the psychology of female orgasm.
Why is that? Assuming it was more complex.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the assumption. But there's actually limited empirical evidence for a huge difference. There was a controlled study, Vance and Wagner, back in '76.
Okay.
And they found that independent raters couldn't actually tell the difference between written descriptions of orgasm experiences for men and women.
So maybe more similarities than differences experientially.
That's what that study suggested, yeah.
Yeah.
More research is always needed, but it challenged the old assumptions.
Interesting. Okay, let's dive deeper into the male experience first. What are the sort of common characteristics there?
Well, the most common way for men is, as we said, physical stimulation of the penis. And that's typically accompanied by ejaculation.
Typically, but not always.
Not always. It's possible, though pretty rare, to orgasm without ejaculating. That's called a dry orgasm.
Okay.
It's normal for boys before puberty, but can also happen later due to things like retrograde ejaculation, where semen goes into the bladder, or conditions like hypogonadism.
And the reverse, ejaculation without orgasm.
Also possible. That's called anorgasmic ejaculation. And another pathway for men is prostate stimulation.
Right, sometimes called the male G-spot.
That kind of analogy is used, yeah.
I remember reading about Masters and Johnson's work, pretty groundbreaking stuff on the sexual response cycle. How did they describe male orgasm in their model?
Right, Masters and Johnson. They described a two-stage model for male orgasm.
Okay.
The first stage they called emission. That's when the accessory organs contract and the man feels ejaculation is, like, inevitable. It's coming.
A point of no return.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
Then, maybe 2 or 3 seconds later, the second stage hits, ejaculation itself. This involves those pleasurable contractions of the penis.
And they linked pleasure to volume.
They noted that often greater pleasure seemed linked to a greater volume of ejaculate.
Okay. And the refractory period for men, that seems like quite a defining feature compared to women.
It is. For men, the resolution phase, the come-down phase, includes this superimposed refractory period.
Meaning?
Meaning a recovery phase where achieving another orgasm is physiologically impossible for a time.
How long does that last?
It varies massively. It can be just a few minutes for younger guys, but maybe over an hour, even hours, for older men.
Do we know why that happens?
The main theory involves hormones again. A big surge of oxytocin during ejaculation is believed to be chiefly responsible for triggering that refractory period.
Makes sense.
But while multiple orgasms are generally rare for men because of this, some have reported consecutive orgasms, especially if they don't ejaculate every time. And there was this one pretty wild study, Rutgers University, 1995.
Yeah.
They documented an adult man having 6 fully ejaculatory orgasms in just 36 minutes, with apparently no refractory period.
6 and 36 minutes. That's an outlier, surely.
Oh, definitely an anomaly. But it shows that even the rules can sometimes be broken.
Okay, so the male experience seems, relatively clearly defined stages, refractory period. But how does that compare to female orgasm? Let's switch gears because I know there's been a lot more debate and shifting understanding there. What are the key factors for women?
Right. So for women, the most common pathway to orgasm is direct sexual stimulation of the clitoris.
Which is incredibly sensitive, right?
Extremely. It boasts over 8,000 sensory nerve endings. That's as many, possibly more, than the penis.
Wow.
And general statistics suggest that somewhere between 70 and 80% of women require this direct clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasm.
70 to 80%, that's a huge majority.
It is. And orgasm intensity, frequency, how much stimulation is needed, it all varies hugely, person to person, even experience to experience for the same person.
What about the vagina itself then? And the G-spot, which always seems described as elusive?
Well, the vagina itself actually has significantly fewer nerve endings compared to the clitoris.
Okay.
But certain areas are more sensitive. The lower third, the front wall, the anterior vaginal wall, and the area near the urethra, they have more sensitivity.
And the G-spot fits in there somewhere.
The area commonly described as the G-spot, yeah. It's often found in that urethral sponge area on the front wall, and stimulation there can produce orgasm for some.
But not for everyone.
Definitely not. Intense sexual pleasure, just from vaginal stimulation alone, without any clitoral input. That seems to be occasional or even absent for many women.
So what does this all mean for penetrative sex? Because that's often depicted, culturally as the main event, the primary path to orgasm for everyone.
That's a really important point. Many researchers, people like 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐷, they've argued pretty strongly that the most sensitive parts of the clitoris often aren't getting direct, consistent stimulation during standard penetrative intercourse. The angle might just be wrong.
So that explains why adjustments are often needed.
Exactly. Why some couples change positions or add manual stimulation or use toys during intercourse to maximize that crucial clitoral engagement.
Okay. Now, there's been this long-standing, and you mentioned earlier, sometimes quite damaging discussion about types of female orgasm, like clitoral versus vaginal. Can you shed some light on that whole debate? Where did that even come from?
Right. This whole distinction really originated with Sigmund Freud way back in 1905.
Freud. Okay. What was his theory?
He theorized that clitoral orgasms were sort of adolescent or immature, and that mature women should transition to having vaginal orgasms purely through intercourse without needing clitoral stimulation.
And did he have evidence for this?
None whatsoever. He provided no evidence. But the idea took hold, and frankly, it led a lot of women to feel inadequate or like something was wrong with them if they couldn't achieve this supposed mature vaginal orgasm.
That sounds incredibly harmful. How did later research challenge those, well, unfounded claims?
Massively. Alfred Kinsey, in his famous reports, based on interviews with thousands of women.
Right, the Kinsey reports.
He harshly criticized Freud. He found most women simply could not have these vaginal orgasms Freud described, and he identified the clitoris as the main center of sexual response.
So Kinsey put the focus back on the clitoris.
He did. And then Masters in Johnson's lab research, and later Shearheight's extensive surveys, they generally backed Kinsey up. They found that physiologically, the responses during orgasms felt as clitoral or vaginal were actually identical. The same muscle contractions, heart rate changes, etc.
So it suggested they weren't different types of orgasms at all.
Exactly. It pointed towards clitoral stimulation being the ultimate source for both, even if the sensation felt deeper or internal sometimes. This really inspired feminists like 𝐤𝐤𝐤𝐿, who wrote about the myth of the vaginal orgasm.
Okay, so physiology points to one mechanism, but what about modern research? Has anything changed that view?
What's really fascinating is the modern research using imaging, like MRI and 3D sonography.
Yeah.
People like Helen O'Connell in Australia, and Odile Buisson, and Pierre Foldez in France.
What did their imaging show?
It showed that the clitoris is much larger and more extensive internally than previously thought. The clitoral tissue actually extends deep into the body, wrapping around the urethra and forming part of the anterior vaginal wall.
So it's physically connected.
Directly connected.
Yeah.
It suggests that stimulating that front wall of the vana, the G-spot area, is pretty much inextricably linked to activating the internal parts of the clitoris. They're part of the same structure.
So the whole clitoral versus vaginal debate was kind of a false dichotomy.
Increasingly, that seems to be the view. It's all interconnected via the clitoral complex.
So going back to the G-spot then, is it still considered a mystery, or is it just that region of the internal clitoris?
It's probably less a mystery now and more understood as a convergence point.
A convergence.
Yeah. Barry Komisaruk at Rutgers described it nicely. He said the G-spot is more of a thing, like New York City is a thing. It's a region. It's a convergence of many different structures.
I like that analogy.
It captures it well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
While some research still suggests maybe slightly distinct brain activity patterns depending on where the stimulation is focused,
Okay.
the prevailing view is this interconnected relationship. The clitoris seems to be the primary, maybe the sole, source of the nerve signals that lead to female orgasm, even if the sensation is felt internally.
That makes a lot more sense biologically. Given this more nuanced picture, what are some of the common challenges women face in actually achieving orgasm?
Well, anorgasmia, that's the term for consistent difficulty reaching orgasm, is significantly more common in women than men.
How common?
Estimates vary, but roughly 25% of women report difficulties, and maybe around 10% say they've never had an orgasm.
Why is that? What are the factors?
There are likely many factors. A major one, often cited, is a lack of comprehensive sex education, especially education that really emphasizes the importance of clitoral stimulation for most women.
Right, moving beyond just penetrative sex as the goal.
Exactly. Also, things like performance pressure, anxiety, and inability to relax, maybe focusing too much on a partner's pleasure instead of one's own.
Psychological factors.
Huge psychological factors.
Yeah.
And it's quite telling, going back to Kinsey's research in 1953.
Yeah.
He found women reported having orgasms much more often during sex with other women, about 78% of encounters compared to sex with men, which is around 55%.
And his explanation?
He attributed it mainly to female partners, likely having a greater understanding and knowledge of women's sexuality and what works.
That's interesting. Have more recent studies looked at satisfaction in same-sex versus heterosexual relationships?
Yes, and more recent studies tend to find that women in same-sex relationships report pretty similar overall satisfaction levels as heterosexual women.
So maybe knowledge and communication have improved generally.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Or maybe satisfaction encompasses more than just orgasm frequency. Many women, regardless of orientation, express that their most satisfying sexual experiences involve emotional connection, intimacy.
Right.
Not solely whether an orgasm happened or not. It highlights that emotional complexity.
Absolutely. Okay, that covers a lot of the, let's say, more typical pathways. But you mentioned earlier some less common routes, even involuntary ones. Let's delve into some of those unconventional ways people might experience orgasm.
Yeah, definitely. Pleasure can certainly be derived from the nerve endings around the anus for both sexes. And for men specifically, orgasm can be achieved through prostate stimulation alone. Some men describe these orgasms as feeling deeper or more widespread than typical penile orgasms.
And the prostate connection.
The prostate is actually the male homologue, the equivalent structure to the 𝐤𝐸𝐬𝐬 glands in women, which are often thought to be connected to the female G-spot region.
Ah, interesting parallel. And for women with anal sex?
Anal sex can indirectly stimulate the clitoris due to shared nerves in the pelvic area, but orgasms solely from anal stimulation itself, without that indirect clitoral effect, seems quite rare.
What about nipple stimulation? I've definitely heard some women report experiencing orgasms just from that. Is that physiologically plausible?
It is. For some women, nipple stimulation can produce anything from mild arousal to quite intense orgasms.
How does that work?
Well, relatively few women report it as their primary method, but Barry Komisaruk's fMRI research, looking at brain activity, indicates that the sensations from the nipples actually travel to the same part of the brain, the genital sensory cortex, as sensations from the vagina, clitoris, and cervix.
Wow, so a direct brain link.
A direct link. Plus, oxytocin, that hormone strongly linked to orgasm we mentioned, is also produced during nipple stimulation, like during breastfeeding.
Fascinating. Okay, now, for one that always surprises people, corgasms from exercise. That sounds almost unbelievable. How can working out trigger something like that?
It really does highlight how interconnected our bodies are, doesn't it? The technical term is exercise-induced sexual pleasure, or EISP. Corgasm is more the popular media term.
EISP, got it.
Early research by Kinsey actually noted this phenomenon, and later studies have explored it a bit more.
So what kind of exercise?
It seems linked to aerobic or isotonic exercises that strongly engage the core abdominal muscles, maybe mimicking some of the muscle contractions or nerve stimulation involved in sexual activity.
Like crunches or leg raises.
Those are often mentioned, yeah. Or climbing ropes or poles. It seems certain repetitive muscle tensing can, in some individuals, trigger similar neural pathways to sexual arousal and occasionally orgasm.
But we don't fully understand the mechanism?
Not really. It's still an area lacking extensive research, but it's a clear example of how broad the spectrum of this experience can be, even happening without any direct sexual thought or contact.
Amazing. Lastly, what about truly involuntary orgasms, situations where the person isn't seeking it at all?
Right. It's crucial to remember that the basic genital reflex is largely regulated down at the spinal cord level. It's not always under conscious top-down control from the brain.
Okay.
So involuntary orgasms can occur in various contexts. We mentioned nocturnal emissions during sleep. Sadly, they can also occur, though very rarely, in deeply distressing situations like during sexual assault.
It must be incredibly confusing and traumatic.
Absolutely, and often underreported due to shame. There's also a condition called persistent genital arousal disorder, PGE, where people experience unwanted, intrusive arousal and sometimes orgasms without any sexual desire.
Okay, that sounds difficult.
And then flipping the coin to consensual contexts, in BDSM play, you have the practice of forced orgasm.
Where it's deliberate but controlled by someone else.
Exactly. It's used as a form of orgasm control, often exploring themes of power dynamics and surrender, where the recipient intentionally gives up control over their climax to a partner.
So many facets to this. Okay, let's get into the mechanics a bit more. Physiologically, what's happening in the body as we approach and experience orgasm?
Well, Masters and Johnson gave us that classic four-stage model.
Right.
Excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution.
Right.
Helen Singer Kaplan later added desire as a stage before excitement, acknowledging you need the motivation first.
Makes sense.
And Rosemary Besson proposed a more cyclical, less linear model, especially relevant for women, where desire might fuel the cycle, but also be fueled by it. And satisfaction isn't solely about reaching climax.
More focus on intimacy and connection, maybe feeding back into desire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
emphasizing that satisfaction can happen at various points, not just the peak.
Okay, so within that framework, how does the male body respond specifically during the orgasm phase?
As a man gets very close, during that plateau phase with penis stimulation, he usually feels that intense, very pleasurable pulsating sensation, a kind of neuromuscular euphoria,
You mentioned it starting in the anus.
often described as starting near the anal sphincter and pelvic floor muscles, then moving toward the tip of the penis. It's often called a throbbing or tingling that builds.
Okay.
Then during the orgasm itself, you get those rapid rhythmic contractions, the anal sphincter, the prostate, the muscles around the penis, all working to expel semen.
And this lasts how long?
The expulsion phase itself is usually pretty quick, maybe 3 to 10 seconds on average, but it's intensely pleasurable. And then, of course, comes the refractory period we discussed.
Right. And for women, what are the physiological hallmarks there? How does it compare in duration?
A woman's orgasm might last a bit longer on average, perhaps around 20 seconds, sometimes more.
And it also involves contractions.
Yes, definitely. Rhythmic muscular contractions in the pelvic area. This includes the muscles around the vagina, the uterus itself contracts, and the anal sphincter, too.
Similar muscles involve them?
Quite similar pelvic floor muscles, yes. These contractions happen roughly at 1-second intervals, maybe a bit faster initially. They tend to increase in intensity at first, then gradually decrease.
And other signs.
Well, leading up to it, in the excitement and plateau phases, you get clitoral erection, vaginal lubrication, maybe the sex flush, that reddening of the skin on the chest and neck. Nipple erection also usually peaks right around the start of orgasm. And there was some interesting research from the University Medical Center of Groningen.
What did they find?
They actually correlated the subjective feeling of orgasm with very specific muscular contractions happening at a frequency of about 8 to 13 hertz. That's 8 to 13 times per second in the pelvis and anus.
So they found an objective measure.
They argue it's the first objective quantitative measure that strongly corresponds with the subjective experience, and importantly, it's different from just voluntarily clenching those muscles or from unsuccessful attempts.
That's a significant step in measuring it objectively. Okay, fascinating stuff happening in the body. But what about the brain? It must be lighting up like crazy, right? What do we know about brain activity during orgasm?
It's tricky to study in real time. You can imagine the challenges.
Definitely, lying still in a scanner.
Exactly. But there have been some studies using P scans, for example, particularly with women, and they showed some intriguing patterns.
Like what?
Brain regions, usually associated with things like behavioral control, fear, and anxiety, actually showed deactivation. They quieted down during orgasm.
They shut down. Why would that be?
Well, one researcher, 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐲, suggested this deactivation, this sort of letting go of all fear and anxiety, might actually be crucial for the orgasm to happen, a necessary condition.
Interesting. Letting go of control.
Right. He even made a somewhat controversial statement suggesting that at the peak moment of orgasm, women might not have any emotional feelings because those control centers are offline.
Okay. Did other research back this up? Or look at men?
Subsequent research, like by Cortecas and colleagues, supported the idea of gender commonalities during the orgasm itself. The main differences in brain activity seem to happen more during the build-up, the stimulation phase, rather than the peak orgasmic phase.
And men's brains.
For men, similar emotional centers also seem to deactivate, maybe to a slightly lesser extent than reported in women in some studies. But pleasure centers showed more intense activity in men compared to women in those scans.
Okay.
Overall, for both sexes, brain scans generally show a temporary decrease in metabolic activity in parts of the cerebral cortex, the thinking part of the brain.
Right.
While activity in the limbic areas, regions linked more to emotion, memory, basic drives, stays normal, or even increases.
So less thinking, more feeling, basically.
That's a simplified way to put it. But yeah, it suggests a shift away from conscious control and thought toward more fundamental processing.
What about those older studies I've heard about suggesting orgasm causes seizure-like brain activity? That always sounded a bit alarming. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, the seizure comparison. Early EEG studies back in the 1950s did report brainwave changes during orgasm that they described as resembling petit mal or even grand mal seizures.
That sounds dramatic.
It does. But later studies, particularly in the 1980s, using more refined EEG techniques, failed to find such distinctive seizure-like changes.
So the newer research contradicts it.
Largely, yes.
Yeah.
And more recent reviews tend to take the view that there are no remarkable, consistent EEG changes, specifically during ejaculation in humans that mimic epilepsy. So there's still some disagreement, or at least evolution in understanding on that specific point. The current thinking leans away from the seizure analogy.
Okay, that's somewhat reassuring. So, pulling this all together, what does orgasm mean for our overall health? Is it actually good for you, beyond just feeling good? Or is it purely pleasure?
There's actually some pretty compelling evidence suggesting real health benefits.
Like what?
Well, there was a notable study in the British Medical Journal back in 1997. It followed over 900 men aged 45 to 59.
Okay.
And it found that the men who reported having fewer orgasms specifically, less than once a month, I think were actually twice as likely to die from any cause over the 10-year follow-up period compared to men having 2 or more orgasms a week.
Twice as likely to die. That's significant. Was it linked to anything specific?
Well, a follow-up study in 2001 looked specifically at cardiovascular health. It associated having sex 3 or more times a week with a 50% reduction in the risk of heart attack or stroke for men.
Wow, a 50% reduction. It seems pleasure isn't just pleasurable, it might be genuinely protective, at least correlationally. That's a pretty strong argument for, well, maintaining an active sex life if possible.
The correlation is certainly strong in those studies, yeah.
But biology is rarely all good news. Are there any known downsides or, less common negative conditions associated with orgasm?
There are. A small percentage of men experience something called post-orgasmic illness syndrome, or POIAS.
POPUA. What's that?
It causes quite severe symptoms immediately after ejaculation, things like severe muscle pain all over the body, intense fatigue, flu-like symptoms, cognitive difficulties.
Really? How long does that last?
It can last for up to a week after just one ejaculation. It's quite debilitating for those who have it.
And is it common?
It's thought to affect a small percentage, but some doctors suspect it might be more common than realized, possibly underdiagnosed, because people might be embarrassed or not connect the symptoms to orgasm.
Okay. And we've touched on anorgasmia, the difficulty reaching orgasm. You said it's more common in women. Can we put some numbers on that again?
All right, anorgasmia. It's significantly more common in women. As we mentioned, estimates are around 25% of women reporting consistent difficulties, and maybe 10% having never experienced an orgasm at all.
And the reasons are likely complex, as you said, education gaps, psychological factors.
Exactly. Lack of comprehensive sex ed, especially about the clitoris, performance pressure, difficulty relaxing, maybe focusing too much on a partner's pleasure, all potential factors.
And you mentioned that Kinsey finding about higher orgasm rates for women with female partners, suggesting knowledge plays a role.
Yes, that 1953 finding was quite stark, 78% orgasm rate in encounters with women versus 55% with men. He attributed it largely to female partners just having better knowledge of female anatomy and response.
Have things changed since the 50s on that front?
Well, as noted, more recent studies find women in same-sex relationships now report pretty similar overall satisfaction levels compared to heterosexual women, which might suggest maybe communication and knowledge have improved somewhat across the board, or satisfaction is measured differently now.
Okay. And how do age and just general health affect orgasm?
Age definitely plays a role. Hormonal changes impact sexual function as people get older.
Like menopause?
For women, yes. Menopause can lead to changes like vaginal dryness, thinning of tissues, sometimes clitoral atrophy, which can affect sensation.
And for men?
For men, testosterone levels naturally decline with age, which can impact libido and erectile function. And generally speaking, across the board, sexual dysfunction, including issues with orgasm, becomes more likely with poorer physical or emotional health.
Makes sense. Lifestyle factors matter.
And negative experiences within sexual relationships themselves are often associated with dysfunction too. It's all interconnected body-mind relationship.
Absolutely. Okay, this next part is where it gets, for me, truly captivating. The evolutionary purpose of female orgasm. This has been debated for ages, right?
Yep.
Sometimes quite heatedly. Is it just a byproduct, or does it actually have a function?
It's one of the big questions in evolutionary psychology and biology, for sure. The starting point is homology, meaning the clitoris and the penis develop from the exact same embryonic structure in the fetus. They're the female and male versions of the same starting part.
Okay, same origin. How did that lead to the byproduct theory?
Well, one prominent theory, often called the byproduct hypothesis, suggests that because male orgasm is so strongly linked to ejaculation and therefore essential for reproduction, it's under strong evolutionary pressure to exist.
Right. It ensures sperm delivery.
Exactly. So this theory posits that female orgasm might just be an ontogenetic leftover, basically, a non-functional byproduct carried over in female development because the underlying developmental pathway is shared with males.
Wait, so the argument is it might just be an accidental feature because of how males evolved? That seems controversial, like the male nipple argument.
That's precisely the analogy often used, yes. Like male nipples, which form because the basic body plan includes them before sex differentiation kicks in, but they don't serve a primary biological function in males. Proponents of this non-adaptive view, like philosopher Elizabeth Lloyd, point to several things. The relative difficulty many women have achieving orgasm through intercourse alone, the limited direct evidence linking orgasm to increased fertility rates, and the lack of a clear correlation between a woman's physical capacity to orgasm and how often she actually engages in intercourse.
So if it doesn't reliably happen during the reproductive act and doesn't clearly boost fertility, maybe it wasn't selected for.
That's the core of the argument. They also cite a 2005 twin study, which estimated that the capacity for female orgasm is about 34–45% heritable, meaning influenced by genetics.
How does heritability support the byproduct idea?
They argue that if it were strongly adaptive, you might expect less variation or stronger links to reproductive success. Its persistence as a variable heritable trait could fit the profile of something that isn't under strong positive selection itself.
Okay. I can see the logic, but I also know there are very strong counterarguments because it does feel like it dismisses such a significant human experience.
Absolutely. Many researchers find the byproduct hypothesis deeply unsatisfying and argue strongly that female orgasm is an adaptation, or at least has adaptive functions.
Who argues this, and on what grounds?
Researchers like evolutionary psychologist Jeffrey Muller, anthropologist Helen Fisher, and surgeon Helen O'Connell, among others, they criticize the byproduct view for, well, understating its profound psychosocial value. For starters.
Like pair bonding.
Exactly. Promoting intimacy, relationship satisfaction, which could indirectly benefit reproduction. Helen O'Connell put it very bluntly, saying the debate boils down to rivalry between the sexes, the idea that one sex is sexual and the other reproductive. The truth is that both are sexual and both are reproductive.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah.
So what are some of the specific adaptive theories then? How might it actually help reproduction?
One interesting idea is the sire choice hypothesis.
Sire choice, like choosing the father.
Kind of. The idea is that female orgasm might have been shaped by selection to help females evaluate and choose high-quality male partners. Perhaps the ability of a partner to consistently bring a female to orgasm signals attentiveness, skill, or genetic fitness.
Ah, okay.
Making her more likely to conceive with that partner, potentially through increased frequency of sex or fostering a stronger pair bond that aids offspring survival.
So an indirect reproductive benefit through mate selection and bonding? What about more direct links to fertility? Are there theories about that?
Yes, there are theories suggesting it might physically increase the chances of conception after intercourse.
How?
The most well-known is probably the 𝐸𝐴 hypothesis, proposed by Baker and Bellis. They suggested the pelvic contractions during female orgasm might create a kind of suction effect that helps draw sperm up through the cervix and into the uterus, retaining more favorable sperm and potentially aiding in sperm competition if multiple male sperm are present.
Has that been proven?
The evidence is debated, let's say. Some studies show uterine contractions, others haven't found a consistent 𝐸𝐴 effect that significantly boosts sperm transport. It's still controversial.
Any other fertility links?
Well, there's the observation that some research suggests women tend to reach orgasm more easily around the time of ovulation.
Oh, implying a timing mechanism.
Potentially, yeah. Linking peak pleasure or likelihood of orgasm to the fertile window could encourage intercourse at the optimal time for conception.
Yeah.
Though again, the evidence isn't conclusive.
What about that Desmond Morris idea, the poleaxe hypothesis?
Ah, yes. The idea that orgasm essentially poleaxes the female, making her feel exhausted and wanting to lie horizontally, thus preventing sperm leakage.
Does that hold water?
It's generally considered pretty unlikely now. Many women feel energized after orgasm, not necessarily exhausted, and the impact on sperm retention is questionable.
Okay, so the direct fertility links are still quite speculative.
They are. And this raises an important question. If female orgasm is adaptive, especially for fertility, why is it so variable? Why isn't it as reliable as male orgasm during intercourse?
Right, that's the tricky part for the adaptive theories.
Evolutionary psychologists like Christopher Ryan and 𝐥𝐤𝐬𝐵 have pointed to this variability, the longer time it often takes females to orgasm and their capacity for multiple orgasms, and hypothesized how this pattern might actually be well-suited for scenarios involving multiple partners, promoting sperm competition, and perhaps confusing paternity. That's another more complex adaptive angle.
So the why behind female orgasm truly remains one of biology's great puzzles, doesn't it? With strong points on both the byproduct side and the adaptation side.
Precisely. The debate is far from settled.
Yeah.
It really highlights the immense complexity of human sexuality, how our biology, psychology, and social behaviors are all tangled together. There's still so much we're trying to figure out.
It really underscores how intertwined our biology is with our social lives and even our sense of self. Okay, this deep dive wouldn't be complete without looking beyond the strictly biological. How has orgasm been understood in, say, spiritual practices, philosophy, or literature?
That's a great dimension to add. Tantric sex, for example, which comes from ancient Indian spiritual traditions.
Right.
It attributes a very different value and meaning to orgasm compared to typical Western views.
How so?
Well, some tantric practitioners actually aim to not necessarily eliminate orgasm, but to transcend the focus on a single brief climax during intercourse. They might aim to stay in a heightened pre-orgasmic state for extended periods.
Why would they do that? What's the goal?
Advocates claim this practice can cause the pleasurable orgasmic feelings to sort of spread throughout one's entire conscious experience. It's about fostering a richer, fuller energetic connection with a partner and the self, moving beyond just that peak moment.
Interesting. A very different focus. And in literature, orgasm seems like it's been a powerful muse for writers and poets for centuries.
Oh, absolutely. It appears quite early on. In antiquity, you have Ovid's Metamorphoses,
Okay.
featuring that famous argument between Jove, Zeus,
Yeah.
and Juno, Hera, about whether men or women get more pleasure from sex. They asked the prophet Tiresias, who had lived as both a man and a woman.
Right, blind prophet.
And Tiresias sides with Jove, saying women experience greater pleasure. Caused quite a stir with Juno, apparently.
Huh. And the theme continued.
Definitely. Through Romanticism, for example. Percy Bysshe Shelley famously wrote the line, "No life can equal such a death," as a metaphor for orgasm.
Wow.
And in another poem, The Boat on the 𝐦𝐨𝐵𝐿, he speaks of the death which lovers love. That connection between orgasm and a kind of death or loss of self is a recurring theme.
And of course that leads to the famous French phrase,
La petite mort.
little death.
Exactly.
Perhaps the most famous euphemism for orgasm, beautifully capturing that sense of temporary oblivion, the loss of ego and awareness that can happen at the peak of climax, like a brief dying and then returning.
It's a very evocative phrase. It is, and it influenced many thinkers. Jorge Luis Borges connected to this idea when he wrote, "All men in the vertiginous moment of coitus are the same man." That loss of individuality in the shared experience.
Even Shakespeare hinted at it.
Yes, literary scholars point to phrases like "to die" or "die in thy lap" in Elizabethan literature, often being used as a euphemism for sexual orgasm.
Fascinating. What about psychoanalysis? Did Freud weigh in beyond the clitoral vaginal thing?
He did. In The Ego and the id, Freud speculated about the life and death instincts Eros and Thanatos. He suggested that sexual satisfaction via orgasm sort of exhausts Eros, the life instinct, temporarily, leaving the field open for Thanatos, the death instinct. Almost like Eros fulfills its mission and then briefly gives way. A very psychoanalytic take.
A very Freudian take, indeed, and more modern writers.
Of course. Authors like D.H. Lawrence, especially in Lady Chatterley's Lover, provided much more explicit and detailed narratives of the actual experience of orgasm, bringing it out of euphemism and into the literary mainstream.
Right. So a rich history and culture and thought. Just quickly before we wrap up, does the animal kingdom offer any brief insights? Or is orgasm primarily a human thing?
Briefly, yes, it's not solely human. The basic mechanics of male orgasm ejaculation triggered by nerve signals are quite similar across most male mammals.
Okay. And females?
Females of many mammal species, and even some non-mammals like alligators, possess clitorises. Though understanding the subjective experience or precise function of female orgasm in other animals is obviously much harder.
Any specific examples?
Research into the highly social and sexual behavior of dolphins is often cited. They seem to engage in sex for reasons beyond just reproduction, suggesting pleasure plays a role.
Right.
And just observing the varying duration or intensity of mating behaviors across species gives some clues. So connecting it to the bigger picture, it definitely suggests that pleasure and complex sexual experiences aren't exclusive to humans in the natural world, even if ours is uniquely shaped by our psychology and culture.
Wow. Okay, that was truly a deep dive. We've covered so much ground from, the tiny muscular contractions right up to grand evolutionary debates and cultural interpretations. It's incredibly complex.
It really is. And what's particularly striking, I think, is that even with all the scientific investigation, all the research we've discussed, there's still so much individual variability, so much we don't fully understand, so much debate.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful reminder that understanding any fundamental human experience like this really requires looking through multiple lenses: the biological, the psychological, the social, the cultural. They all intersect.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, tuning in? Maybe it's a new appreciation for just how incredibly complex your own body is.
Could be.
Or perhaps a fresh perspective on intimacy and relationships, maybe encouraging more open communication about what feels good, what works.
Definitely possibilities. Or maybe, thinking bigger picture, it prompts a deeper consideration. How might a more comprehensive, a more nuanced understanding of orgasm, one that's free from some of those historical myths and misconceptions we talked about,
Right.
how might that empower individuals? How might it change the way we approach sexual health, sexual education, and overall satisfaction in society?
That's some real food for thought to leave with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep digging into what makes you curious.